Um, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to have a video that was dedicated to checking in about lesson planning. Um, I think that lesson planning is one of the most important skills that I still am growing into myself. I am somewhat, I don't know if it's fortunate, but my experience is that I do not have to submit lesson plans for approval, right? Public school teachers, often K through 12, depending on the school, especially in their first years of teaching, really have to work on formal lesson planning and writing very detailed plans. One thing I've learned as a teacher in a variety of settings is that I have to be willing to be flexible, and I have to be able to be flexible because it always shifts, right? I'm in conversation with my learners, with my students, with my participants, whether I'm facilitating a community workshop or I'm teaching our class or I'm working with a group of kids in the school gardens. There's always something that is going to shift. And so lesson planning is good to organize my own thoughts and help me prepare. However, especially my teaching style, my approach is one of emergence, right? And so we've talked about how I can create a plan for this class and in the moment say, I think what we're getting into is really important. And so I can cut it, right? Or I can switch it. However, this class, for example, has a set of objectives. And so when I'm planning on what guests should I bring, what activities should I include, if I'm really stuck, one place I return to is the learning objectives. So all of the syllabi of the courses that you're in have learning objectives. All of the lessons that are conducted in a more formal context likely have some kind of lesson plan. And the learning objectives, I think, are the most significant part of the lesson plan, but the whole lesson plan itself is a roadmap and is part of a curriculum. And so as we launch into this unit on formal education, and that's in the context of school gardens at a public school like Amherst Public Schools, for example, there's a whole curriculum, and within that curriculum there are what's called frameworks, and within that there are standards, so that way we can test students in this standardized way that says you are at third grade level if you can do these things, right? And so you don't have to do that if you're giving a 2-hour workshop at a community center on kombucha, right? But you are going to say, okay, I have 2 hours. These are materials I'm going to need. I'm going to do a demo. How long is the demo going to take? What am I going to do? So for me, yes, if you're not going to be teaching in a formal context, the lesson planning is going to look different for you. But I think it's really good to learn in a more formal way, and then you can dial it back. I'm not creating really formalized lesson plans for every class, right? But I think it's really important to understand all the different parts of a lesson plan. And in the context of your micro teaching, it's short, 10 minutes. This isn't like a whole school day or a 2-hour class, right? You only have 10 minutes. So the lesson plan is going to be really simple. And I don't think I was clear enough, though lesson plans I'm getting in are showing me that I still need to clarify a few things with you. So I wanted to make just a short video that's not necessarily a PowerPoint presentation. I actually just wanted to navigate between a few different documents. I wanted to look at some examples of lesson plans that I think are and were really effective previous micro teaching lesson plans, as well as a formal lesson plan that we've conducted at Brookfield Farm on a field trip, so you can get a sense of what a different lesson plan looks like. So in addition to that, we're going to look at two ways, I guess you would call them techniques or theories or approaches to writing effective learning objectives, and the theory of Bloom's taxonomy, as well as SMART learning objectives, which we talked about, and I did a little presentation on that with you in our synchronous session already. So without further ado, if you'll join me, I'm going to be navigating between a few different documents. Who's seen this before? Maybe, maybe not. So each of these tiers we could spend an hour talking about. But what I wanted to start doing is just framing it in this context of a bigger conversation we're having about sort of a critique on the formal education that many of us are a product of, whether that's public or private education, and that could be K through 12 or up into college. I think that what we've talked about is I remember in our earlier forums, a frustration of perhaps apathy or disconnect within a public school or a learning environment. And often what I remember reading in some of your Moodle forum posts and just from previous years, a lot of, at the heart of that is the way that a lot of the material is taught is so that we can regurgitate, right? We can just spit out facts for an exam. And so it's just like kind of like a recall and then forget, right? And I would put that here at the bottom, like remember. And then there's this like understand, like we can get the basics down here. And this is sort of where a lot of my formal education was rooted. And certainly, you know, I've had a chance to do some application. I'm an alumni through Stockbridge. And so a lot of my education was hands-on, and I got to work on farms and do things like many of you. What we're shooting for is to write objectives in our education design process that also create opportunities if we're going to implore a more engaged pedagogy. It's going to require us to create learning objectives that encourage students really participate in an embodied way where they're creating something, right? They're able to not only just understand it, but they're able to apply it to an extent where they can then create something. That's the goal. This might not happen in your 10-minute micro teaching lesson, and that is okay. But what I wanted to do was just sort of provide this framework as a context. And so let's see if we can make more sense of this. So I'm going to go to this other page. Hopefully you can see this. We'll see. So each of those tiers of understanding are testing different parts of our brain, right? And so to just sort of recall and remember, they're saying, according to Bloom's taxonomy, the theory is that's the least significant form of learning. It's very important, but in that sort of tier, we're using action verbs. All of Bloom's taxonomy is really an emphasis on verbs. The very first word we include in the learning objectives, for example, choose, define, understand, analyze, describe, articulate. The stronger those words can be, the better the objective. So you saw this in a previous reading, but I just like this chart in addition because it aligns each of these with the tier of Bloom's taxonomy. So within that hierarchy of from create being where we ideally want to go to where most of our education is remember, which is okay and important still. But if you look at this, this is saying to have memory of something that we just learned. So you can choose, you can define. These things would be multiple choice, short answers, kind of like exam question stuff that many of you see maybe in a botany exam. And again, I'm not villainizing this. It's just looking at, you know, in this class, we have the fortune in that we're smaller of a group so we can engage more and do more. That leans toward this create, knowing that, you know, not every class we're doing this. I would love to do more of this. And again, it's something that within your 10-minute lessons it's a limit. But just wanted you to think about in this tier or in this, I guess you could call it a tier, the top tier of Bloom's hierarchy or Bloom's taxonomy. You're not only remembering something, but you're compiling information and synthesizing it in a way where you're combining all of these elements and you're able to to synthesize them and create. So you're able to adapt, build, change, design, implement, let's see, what are some of these words? Yeah, create, formulate. So you see the shift in language here. And so understand, I'm going to use that word as an example. Understand is something that's harder to measure. And in our learning objectives, we talked about why learning objectives. Well, they're a way that we can look back at the end of the lesson, like we are doing right now in our micro teaching feedback, and saying, did this lesson meet its objectives? Maybe on a scale from 1 to 10, how effectively did it meet its objectives? And so having stronger action verbs can make a lesson stronger. The stronger your objectives are, the more is possible. So if you want your students to be able to design and build their own chicken tractor, you can't just show them a couple pictures and lecture at them and expect them to do so. You're going to have to include some kind of hands-on component where students get to see the different materials. Students get to see examples of good chicken tractors, analyze the features of, I like the feature on that chicken tractor. I wonder if that would work. And we took this feature from this one and we tried, right? So it's like you're trying things on in a way that's different than just saying on a short answer exam, here are the parts of a chicken tractor, right? So I'm going to stop the share. Okay, so I want to look at lesson plans. I've got a couple examples from previous years. Okay, so let's dive into looking at a couple lesson plans together. I want to preface this by saying that we could dive into a bunch of my objectives that I've written over the years and continue to workshop them to death, basically, to make them better. So I love this lesson plan, and the learning objectives could be better. So I want to look at them with you and show you what I mean. Lots of things I love about this lesson plan. The student opened it with a quote, which is just like, after my own heart, right? There's a little bit of a contextual description here, which is optional but not required, but I like it here because it gives like this little summary. It's like an abstract, right? Again, not required. She sort of did this on her own. And I like this. Your lesson plans, I want you to write them as if another student, peer in your class, was going to lead your lesson. What kind of language would you want them to see that would be like, if you were to pick it up, it would be like a recipe. Okay, so it should read like a recipe where I'm picking this up and I'm saying, okay, you want me to divide the class in half, and then we're going to write these questions on the board. Each group gets 6 pieces of paper, right? Like you're going to write this out, and I'll show you what I mean. So this student here, we've got these learning objectives. This lesson is about compost, and it's got a creative title, Composting Heroes. I love it. And so this is a little bit frustrating because it's so easy and makes sense to just write the word learn. When we're looking at these objectives, learn that trash is composed of 2 types of waste. Well, where is learn on that hierarchy of blooms, right? Again, knowing that there's limits with what we can do in 10 minutes. Learn that decomposers such as fungi, microorganisms, and insects are important in the decomposition of organic waste. What would make that second objective even better? So we're learn that decomposers such as fungi, microorganisms, and insects are important. Great. How am I going to assess that? One idea, instead of learn that decomposers, it could be identify decomposers and their roles in an ecosystem, or it could be draw a map illustrating the interconnectedness of decomposers in an ecosystem. Draw, like, make a list of the different decomposers of organic waste and articulate their roles, right? So we want to be more specific. So instead of learn, we could come back to that list of Bloom's taxonomy verbs, and we can say, okay, instead of learn or define, if we want to push people more into this region here, I'm going to analyze the role of different decomposers in an ecosystem, in a composting system. I'm going to, let's see, create a replica of a compost system, right? Like, again, knowing it might not happen within 10 minutes. I'm just trying to identify here that there is a place where we are introducing a concept, where we're practicing a concept, or strengthening or mastering a concept. In 10 minutes, I don't expect you to be in that sphere of mastery. However, I want you to just look at those learning objectives and see how could you make them even better. We're coming back to this. So say we strengthen these learning objectives a little bit. The materials I like written like this. The lesson opening, I just want to highlight here the use of verbs that read like a lesson plan. Going to introduce the topic, ask students. One student share what they know, ask them to draw a food item, call on volunteers. Got it? So this part here, the instructor will ask the class, is inconsistent. So one other thing I want you to pay attention to, in addition to the verbs you're using in both your objectives and your outline of the lesson, is consistency. So if you're going to start each bullet with divide the group, distribute the materials, don't then backpedal to say the instructor will ask the class. Say, ask the class, right? So that's just one. I'm getting picky, but this is just one thing. I think if you could be mindful of this, you'll write a stronger lesson plan. And you see it in this section too, where the language shifts. And so instead of questions or students will receive a handout, stay consistent with that language of distribute the handout, ask the group for questions. Does this make sense? Hopefully. Okay. Let's look at one more micro teaching example. The objectives here. Name and identify a fruit developed in Massachusetts. Awesome. Learn about the health benefits of a Concord grape. Okay. I'm just going to flag that as how could I make this one even better? Know and share 3 ways the Concord grape can be used or consumed from fresh grapes, juice, and jam. I would say identify 3 ways, or recall, articulate, describe in your own words 3 ways, right? So how can we make that a little bit stronger instead of know and share? And this last one I like because it's include the fruit of the week, which is Concord grape, the context of this lesson, in their diet the day of the lesson. So that's kind of like an application piece. So again, we're always in progress in making these better, but I wanted to show you some live examples. So I really like the students' use of the materials section. If you're doing this live, like if you're actually going to do this, I would include, I like this inclusion of quantities here, maybe including in here too, like 1 jar of peanut butter, 2 jars of peanut butter. Sometimes we don't know, but it could be really helpful if you put ratios in there too for yourself. This is the last point that I want to talk about. This section of this lesson plan borders, it's okay, but it borders on being a little bit of a script. And so if you're writing this lesson plan for another person to be able to lead it, I like to just tease out what are the internal notes for yourself, like things that you want to remember to say, and then just the outline of the lesson itself. So there's kind of a difference there. I don't want to see your notes. Like, I don't want to see the internal notes or your script. I want to see a lesson plan. And so announce that there will be time taken from science class today. Great, that's an introductory statement. Explain the fruit of the week. This is sort of where the language shifts, the coloring page of a grape cluster. So instead of the will be placed where we are in passive voice, switch to active voice. Distribute coloring pages, right? So often in lesson plans, we say things with so many words and it could really be reduced. In the actual body, show a picture once the Concord grape is revealed. So this is kind of like, it's a nice outline of your steps. And I'll put these examples up on Moodle, but I just wanted you to see, I really like the use of the verbs here, so it does read like a lesson plan, but wanted to just bring up that point of check your lesson plan and see, can I extract some of these internal notes for myself? Like if you're teaching a lesson about Concord grapes and you have some notes in there about like the skin of the grape and the percent acidity, like that might just be information for you to remember. And if you're writing this for another instructor, you could put at the bottom like useful notes to remember or something like that, but I just don't want it to be blended in with the actual outline of your lesson. Does that make sense? I hope so. Lastly, we are going to look at a lesson from Brookfield Farm. So hopefully you can see this Brookfield Farm screen. If not, I'm going to have to redo this part. Every year we take our class, our ag leadership class, to Brookfield Farm. This year we can't do it. But Leela Tennell, who's one of the garden-based educators, along with Jennifer Reese at Amherst Public Schools, who will be joining us, lead a lesson with either a group, likely a group of kindergartners. So this lesson's for kindergartners. And I just mentioned earlier the standards. So standards, if we're looking in a formal education setting, like a public school, like Amherst Public Schools, which is a public school in Massachusetts, there are sets of standards that all students have to, that all teachers have to incorporate in their lessons, so that all students are hitting a certain standard, so that when we're in 3rd grade, we can say, these are the standards and qualifications that one needs, the competencies that one needs to be in 3rd grade. And that's where standardized tests, we can critique those another time, are a way to gauge where students are with their understanding of the standards. So all of the lessons that we do in the garden, because the time teachers have is so precious, because they have to get their students' competencies met, they have to be sure to feel confident that their students are hitting the competencies. A lot of the garden-based lessons could also be meeting those standards, but we could do them instead of in the classroom in the garden. So Jen and Leela are going to talk about this more, but I just wanted to show you what a formal school garden lesson plan looks like. So this is the Brookfield Farm one, and at the top it shows these are the actual standards. I'll talk a little bit more in another video about what this code looks like, but these are the state standards. And so we're saying in this lesson at Brookfield Farm, we're going to hit all these things. So instead of looking at a book and doing coloring pages of recognizing that all plants grow and change over time, we're going to do this on the farm. Okay, and so if these are objectives, we have to make sure that the activities meet that. So the objectives, students will examine growing farm vegetables and identify their roots, stems, and leaves. Generate ideas based on observations about what plants need to grow. Observe and feed farm animals. Compare. What level of hierarchy might that be, right? That's getting into more analysis. In order to compare something, you have to have a deeper understanding of it than just regurgitating and remembering it, right? And observe. Again, these are kindergartners, so they're not going to be doing a ton of things in that sort of higher tier of learning. We've got some vocabulary words, materials. See how it's very specific here. There's a timed itinerary of the lesson. And this is because there were multiple people facilitating this, and it sort of breaks it out. I like to include a timed agenda internally for myself so I can see how long things take. So this is just a sample template. Again, I'll put this up for you as well. But your lesson plan is going to look different depending on the age group and the context where you're working. And so this video is just here to help. I'm here to look at your lesson plans. Roisin, the course TA, will also be looking at them and we'll be giving you feedback. But go ahead and take a look at that and see. And if you've already written your lesson plan and you want to try again, I welcome it. I will see you soon. Bye, friends.
Não adianta nem